fact, in one of the courses that I taught in Chanakya, the one thing that I did was, I just downloaded the videos from the parliamentary debate. You would be surprised the number of stories of Mahabharata that get used to communicate certain argument in India's parliament is incredibly huge. So there is this deeper interconnectedness in the way that we have thought about our past. Therefore, there is an absolutely unparalleled and a unique way of thinking about past, not just to document in calendar when somebody died. Who cares? I mean, so many millions of people have come and gone. People will come, whomever is born, he will die. So therefore, I mean, what is so important? Imagine tomorrow, 140 crore deaths record. What will you do with that? Now, we are interested when people lived, how did they solve given problem? I mean, this is precisely why we need to really go back to the past.
One of the concrete kind of efforts that was made in post-independent India by a traditionally trained quote-unquote modern historian to try and ask and try to respond to the question, what is our own way of looking at the past?
I think one thing which we should discuss is that what is Bharatiya way of looking at the past again? I think, do we have, and more on that, time ನಾನು ನೋಡ್ತೀನಿ sir. ತೊಂದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲ. I'll just give you the thing if you, and I think we will discuss that.
I must say, Pandurangiji has made the overall story very easy. So some of the points that he is saying, something that we must get into the debate, something that we are also confronted now when reading Mahabharata. But I will come back to the original point and I will connect this to my encounters with Narayanacharya. Now, this was the period between 2000 to 2010 where I used to be there at Indian Institute of Science. And I used to work with the historians, proper historians who were part of the Indian Institute of Science. There were historians then working. One of them was Professor Rajan Gurukul. And he was from Kerala. He was a student of Romila Thapa. And we used to have a lot of conversations with him. And by looking at some of the conversation, one day Professor Akhilesh took me to Narayanacharya's house. So let's go and have a conversation. And Narayanacharya was, though he was very politely describing, he was like a bomb. Literally, he was very, all the time, active, very radical in talking to. And he used to converse with people of all kinds. And we had, over a period of time, multiple rounds of conversation. But one thing out of his conversation actually triggered my inquiry into explorations into past, which is very profound. Now, one of the things that he said is that, look, Ramayana, Mahabharata, we all know, we watch dramas, we hear Gamaka, Yakshagana, Thalamaddale, we are all familiar. But when you want to study Mahabharata, it is upasana. Now, you need to have a guru and you should do upasana. Now, this struck me. Now, because why should you, if it is about the story of something, some Raja had come, they fought some war and they killed each other, some chronological document, you have to just map it on the calendar. I mean, if this were to be of that kind, why should you do upasana? Why should you have a guru, who will initiate you? And then you will go through a training with him to understand what this text is about. So there is a completely different way of looking at this text. So that was then, was not possible to what Pavanji would label as the so-called rational mind. But that became a very interesting and powerful force for which I have thought about over a period of time. I have written about it. We have looked at problems of history and how we should look at our past. And let's make this conversation a little more experiential. Now, just to begin the conversation, all the discussion that now we are trying to explain, Pandurangiji very scholarly picked from Mahabharata. Indeed, that's the right way to look at some of the issues that we have in front of us. Now, but I was brought up in a small village where we were flooded, irrespective of which jati you belong to. We were flooded with the stories of Mahabharata, Rāmāyaṇa, various Purana, not just the Purana that we have in Sanskrita tradition, we have local Jati Purana, all of them, and there used to be a lot of interactions. And never ever the question of the truth was asked in the manner that we ask today. There is a very different way that we ask the question of truth. In last over 30, 40 years, our way of understanding our own way, because my grandfather and his generations, they have been immersed completely in this way of looking at their past. So there is something that we can say, that we are amidst of two different ways of talking about the past. One, there is something that which comes from our parampara, where there are some scholars who are immersed into shastras, where they engage in Sanskrit texts. There are many number of people who are not part of any of the shastric learning, but they equally know all these stories and they engage and they reflect, and it is part of their daily life, their ritual life. These stories are extremely important for their daily existence. Now, you come back, there is another way of talking about whether in our history textbooks Aurangzeb should be written like this, whether Tipu Sultan should be dealt like this. There is another way of talking about our past. One is an issue where we are more busy in making calendar mapping and making some judgments about it. There is another way which is very pleasing to us, that everywhere, if you want to tell your children, you want to communicate something very powerfully, you don't go and say, I don't like it. You tell a story. And where do these stories come from? It is Duryodhana, Shakuni, Gandhari, Kunti. We are flooded with these stories. And even today in our house, dining table conversation to everything, our life goes on. In fact, in one of the courses that I taught in Chanakya, the one thing that I did was, I just downloaded the videos from the parliamentary debate. You would be surprised the number of stories of Mahabharata that get used to communicate certain argument in India's parliament is incredibly huge. So I just put them saying, why is these parliamentarians who otherwise hate everything Indian, they sit and everybody is using the story of Duryodhana, Shakuni, Kunti, Gandhari, everybody is flooding in the parliament. Why is this happen? Is the beginning of the inquiry, and I will take that as an inquiry point. Let's come back and look at our own most ordinary situations. Imagine, a lot of our friends, we meet. We have nowadays this gathering of our college group meeting after 20 years, 30 years. These get-togethers happen. And all of us keep recollecting our past. Now, there will be some elements of something that somebody had said, our teacher did this, something, and all these stories we recollect. And these stories are full of all kinds of things, and we cherish retelling this story. Why do you look at, every conversations that we do, whether it is inside our house, whether in our public conversations, in our part of life, everywhere India is full of this talking about one's own past. What happened in my past? What happened when I was in college? When we are saying that we have a particular way of narrating, and in this narration of our past, we hardly care whether it has really happened or not. Now, if you actually go back, most often, in my own lifetime, many stories that we have been retelling, it gets every time improvised, represented. We keep retelling the story. While retelling, sometimes if you think, did I really do this? It is almost impossible to figure that out. We have traveled so much. But there is this deeper engagement of the past that we generally have. And this past has a function. What is its function? It has multiple functions. But the ultimate goal of this past at any given point in time that we recollect is about, how do you live better? There is happiness. There is a craving for happiness. Every reunion, every get-together that we do is this craving for happiness. We go back and you get excited. You plan your travel in such a way that you wanted to tell stories of the past. All that we have is this past, which is actually, we live in past. There is no distinction between our present and past for us. Now, this is the way that we have thought about, and if this is what gives us happiness, one of the most fascinating contributions that Indians have done is to make this past as a vehicle of ensuring happiness to people. Now, at the end of the day, if you look at happiness, who needs to get happiness? Every single individual who is living on this earth is required to have happiness. I have not come across a single person who would say, I wanted to live for unhappiness. So you would want to really be very happy. And to be happy in this world require some kind of a training for you. Now, let's say I am craving for my happiness, and my happiness is in conflict with somebody else next to me. Because as human beings, we live in groups. Because we are social organisms. So therefore, there is a lot of careful crafting of our past that is very necessary in order to make sure that, we can coexist. Therefore, how do I interact with this person, that person? What do I remember? What do I not remember? What should I say? Therefore, one of the most brilliant quote that he gave. Now, there are three important components. There is Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. Now, it is all important because all of us human beings, so Yajnavalkya says, what is the most fundamental nature of the human being? Atmanastu Kamaya. We will do this because there is this great desire for us to do, get right. Priyam Bhavati. Now, that gives me happiness. So, there is this crave that we have. As human beings, we need to be happy. And this being happy requires certain kind of orientation, certain kind of training. How do you train people? So you need to go back to the past when people encountered such situation, when they had dealt with these kind of situation. One need to figure out what did they do. Is there anything that we can learn from what did they do? So therefore the issue is not about this X person or Y person or Chaitra or Pandurangiji. I mean, these are unimportant to us. Is there anything worthy of learning from them? And if there is worthy of learning, now therefore it has happened in the past, therefore it is Itihāsa and it is Kathavrittam. How do you say? I am not going to give you bullet point talks. I will tell you a story, and these stories are not shaped in the form of truth and falsity. Indian stories, you cannot settle truth and falsity of the story. The way in science we build models, models are neither true nor false. Everyone knows, either you can take that model or discard that model. The stories are neither false nor true. But then if you take the story, what do they give you is the heuristic to act in this world, yukti. If I take it, that's why Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. If you're a seeker, then what you need is you need to reconceptualize past in a particular way. Now, once you put that, now is this exactly whether this occurred here is important or not? Maybe it is important at some point in time. Maybe it is not important so much. Therefore, we had very sophisticated way of understanding the even truth question. Just because I wanted to make someone happy, you can't lie. Anruta is forbidden. So therefore it has to be true, but we have a very sophisticated distinction between Paramarthik Sat, Vyavaharik Sat. Now all that you are searching in this world, now 1799 Tipu Sultan died is in the realm of the Vyavaharika. Maybe it died. Is it of significance? Maybe, may not be. Who cares? Now, whether Duryodhana did this, it is of significance to us. Now, some people argue that Duryodhana was there. Some people might say it is all, he may not be there. How does it matter? Rama being Maryada Purushottama is not dependent on his historical existence. For us, he is the Maryada Purushottama. Krishna is whatever he is. Krishna with 16,000 women is the greatest of the role model brahmachari, if at all you wanted to have. So it actually tells us a different way of looking at the world, different way of configuring how do we look at the truth also. Therefore, why do you need past? Past is required for Paramartha. Now, Paramartha might sound a very heavy word for you. But as a most fundamental quest for a human being to be happy in this world, Para is the realm of happiness. It is not the Apara. Of course, your happiness you will find here only in the Apara, but nonetheless it belongs to the realm of Para. Therefore, all that we wanted to do is there is a craft that needs to be designed. When you are talking about your past, this is what has happened. It has to be directing you towards something that gives you happiness. Therefore, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha are very central. If you look from this point of view, our ancestors not just thought about the past very seriously, they created a very skillful way of writing this past. And not just the skill, they flooded with the whole country. From Afghanistan to Burma, from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, from Tibet to Kanyakumari, wherever we go, whether Buddhist tradition, Jain tradition, or any Janjati tradition you go, we are flooded with the stories of the past. And there is this interconnected. The Lord Saraswati here and Lord Manjushri there. There is absolutely no problem in the way that we conceptualize our world. And what does this past give us? It gives us happiness. This is Paramartha. Of course, every individual has different levels of accessing this past. Now, whatever level, somebody might say, I am very happy. No, here itself, I am getting salary every month. My children are getting schooled, I am happy. That level of happiness, they will stop. Somebody, his kama, atmanastu kamayaha. His desire is so powerful enough that he will become moksharthi. So there are different people who will take it to different level. And the entire way of structuring the kind of stories that we have is of a different order. The kind of question, the question of truth that we have raised is very different from what historians ask. And the history that we have today, which fundamentally comes from the European preoccupation. Now, I will not get into the detail. Now, the only thing that history is bothered about, history is considered to be, allegedly considered to be the science. I don't know what is the science, because most philosophers of historian today says that there is no way in which you decipher the truth of the history today. It is all different kind of interpretation from the perspective that you come from. And what are they searching? They are searching for everything in the Vyavaharik Sat. It is in the realm of the apara, that in the realm of the existence, that they are searching. So 1799, whether 1030 Tipu Sultan died, 1045 he died, is a matter of dispute. How does it matter? Even if there would have been no war, Tipu Sultan would have still died, and so am I. So therefore there will be no, it is of no consequence if you look at the human life as such. But whenever I am here, what do I do in order to make sure that, we actually be happy in this world? For that, there is something very different. So if you want to write history, for example, what is central to history, any methods of history, is the historical truth, which is the truth of occurrence of an event in this way. That's why you take an interpretative mode, that mode, this mode, whatever mode, but nonetheless, you're trying to see. So therefore, many historians and philosophers asked many questions about history. So many people have asked this question, has history any meaning? And most of them conclude that it has no meaning. It is not my conclusion. It is the world top-class philosophers who arrived at those conclusions. Now, has there anyone in this world that have learned from anything from history? The answer is, we have no example of anybody learning anything from history. Now, if that were to be happening, seriously, if that were to be happening, we would not have had world war. We are heading towards another world war now. In few years, we are going to hit that. Now, if that were to be the case, has anyone learned anything from history? Therefore, one of the most smartest things that our ancestors did was they placed this kind of looking at past based on historical truth in a very limited way. There are people, we have some epigraphs available, there are some practical Vyavaharika concerns for which, this kind of past might be necessary, but by and large it is not necessary. Therefore, I wanted to sort of wrap up by telling you a story how significant it is to go back to our way of looking at past, where the goal of the past is about Paramartha. In fact, one of the saddest things that has happened because of the 200 years of colonialism that we went through is that we have lost the ability, the craft of Itihasa is not there. In fact, one of the tasks Udbhava, all of us must engage, is how do we recreate this tradition of writing Itihasa? It is gone completely from us and we need to recreate that. Now, why it is important? I will tell you an example. So, a few years back, I come from Hassan district. So because of the politics that came through Panchayati, there were a lot of division between communities in the village. Now, so many elders in the village were very upset about what was happening. So finally one day, one smart guy went, we have a procedure in our village that you go and ask God. We have a Mallikarjuna and there is Choma Devata, there you go and ask, and there is some kind of a narration why it is happening. So somebody went and asked, why is that in our village there is so much of disturbance, people are not talking to each other, it is a very bad scene in the village, what should we do? So there is this entire elaboration process of helike, the statements made by the God, and there are interpreters to that. While interpreting, it said, say, in last 25 years, you have forgotten to perform Nāṭaka. So you should perform Nāṭaka. Now, in our village, this was the solution given by the God. Because it has been told by God, no, you can't say. And we have certain rules in our village that, when you perform the drama, Every community participates. There are no professional artists. Nobody comes from outside. So it is the villagers who come and they actually take part, So it is 6 months of practice. There is a teacher who comes. He will teach all this fantastic Shatpadi, Kandapadya, everything they learn. In 6 months, every community will participate. There is no community which says, no, I will not participate. Everyone comes. 6 months, the practice was happening. And my house is just next to the temple. Now, from evening 6 till 11 o'clock, we hear everything that happens in the temple in our house. So practice will be loud with the harmonium, teacher will be. So I had a chance to take my son during the time to the village. 5-6 days he was there. The three important results that I wanted to say what happens out of it. Now after this entire drama, there is every year in February, March, we have a village jatra. By the time the jatra got over, all this community, disharmony was, without setting any panchayati, without dispute resolution, it simply dissolved. It was simply non-existing in the matter of 6 months. This is the first thing. Second thing, I took my son there, and every day, 5:30, he will go and sit in front of the temple, because that was the most attractive thing for him. And he learned so many songs there. And every morning he will get up with some song. So some Kandapadya, some Shatpadi will be coming out of, and he still carries them. So every year, one of his greatest desire is he wouldn't mind bunking an exam because he wanted to see that Nāṭaka. This is a fascinating attraction to that. All kind of drama itself get dramatized in our village. It's very fascinating to see that. Third most important, after 6 months, we were walking in the streets of the village. When we were walking, normally everyone knows everyone in the village. Now there are all kinds of conversation in the village. Now, one day I was attentively simply walking in different streets of our village and listening what kind of conversations were happening. And you will be astounded. In everyone's mouth, there was Duryodhana, there was Karna, Shakuni, all that normal. Don't behave like a Shakuni. They will be talking about Duryodhana, Karna, Arjuna. Everybody is getting enacted in the ordinary lives of the people to communicate to you something, to tell you something, what to do, all that moral story, everything. Whatever you wanted to do in the villages, in the lands where they were plowing, everywhere, these stories were simply getting reenacted. Now, this actually creates such a fascinating, harmonious language where you don't go and say anybody straight. In a very subtle way, he used a very important point. Sukshmati sukshma nyaya. You acquire that ability to reason and communicate to people on how to be in this world. And this is a very lived way of rethinking about past. Now, I wanted to draw another contrast. Because Europe lacks this kind of engagement with past, and they're obsessed with history, for them, it is only in the weekend they go and see their past. Their present and past are separated. And they take 15 days break to go and experience something. They don't have past. Now for us, there is no way on this earth we can separate our present from our past. Now most historians, including Romila Thapar, when they actually write history, it is less history and more of our stories. And a third-class interpretation of that story. Now they have not picked up this historiography, a method of writing history, whatever way. So therefore, one of the most important part, I am not saying that doing history is a useless task. No, it is very useful in certain areas. We wanted to write about institutional history. For example, what made Indian Institute of Science to take certain kind of, we need to learn from procedures, what kind of people to be recruited, how they build such an institution. There, this kind of, documented way of looking at history might be useful. But in 95% of the cases, our ancestral way of looking at our past takes us to happiness. And that happiness, which actually incorporates Dharma, Artha, Kama. Because it tells us, now you read Kautilya's Arthaśāstra. It's brilliant. The way past gets used. In Kautilya's Arthaśāstra, he gives Indriya Jaya is the central theme of the Kautilya's Arthaśāstra. And what happens if you have Indriya Jaya? What happens if you don't have Indriya Jaya? So he gives example of Ravana not having Indriya Jaya, what happened to him? and Raja Ambarisha, be having Indriya Jaya, what happened? This is the way past gets used. There was Vena, the Raja Vena. So what happened? There is a very interesting kind of illustration, and there is a significant way in which we look at the past. Now, past is not simply about chronology. It is not calendar mapping. At some place it might be. So therefore, let's not confuse. There are political battles that people are fighting, which is fair. I mean, I'm not going to criticize those battles of how to teach Aurangzeb, how much of Mughal history, etc. is one kind of a debate. It has a different function. But all these can be made sense of provided we keep our culture, our communities, flooded with the story of the past. Because, you can't give Dharma by giving lectures on Dharma. Now, Dharma is a way of being in this world. This is a way. So there are Dharma Sukshma. When you have to make this kind of an action, when you should not. When you should succumb to somebody, when you should not. For that, what we need is, we need Mahabharata, we need Rāmāyaṇa, we need our Jati Purana, we need all kinds of Puranas that we have. And if we don't have them as lived reality, that's why we need to flood ourselves with all these, Harikathā tradition, Kirtana tradition, Gamaka tradition. Every village we should, one of our tasks is this cultural renaissance which will actually make everything dharmic. Otherwise, dharmic public policy will never become dharmic. So one had to rethink about how do we reshape the way we actually connect to our past, because we don't know how to live, disconnected with the past. And this disconnection, cannot be replaced by the history. Now, that's why Narayanacharya, I started with remembering him, saying that Ramayana is upasana. Now, for us, every drama is part of our ritual. You don't simply go on, you can do performance in Rangashankara. That is not the drama that I am talking about. We have a different drama in our village. And all the drama, whether it is Mandata Charitre, whether it is Valivade, where we have all Yediyurappa Siddaramaiah also comes as part of our play. We reflect about it. Yeah, everywhere. You bring everything that is happening, including the illicit affairs in the village, everything come there. Nothing is kept, outside this, purview, and precisely how our past is rethought, because that should guide us how to be happy in this world. And until and unless practically we reintroduce this way of accessing the past, which Acharya Pandarangi actually pushed towards more a shastric debate. I have made it more a general for a more practical purposes. But it is three important elements. Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. If you want to really think about them, make every individual, because it is necessary for every individual. If that has to happen, Itihāsa is very important. And for that, Kathavritta is very important. Without Katha, you cannot do that. And we are the only culture on this earth, I can guarantee you, there is nothing which can match with us, that we have made this kind of storytelling. We have flooded the country. Everybody, whether literate, illiterate, and in fact, that is what Pawanji was talking about, the nobility of the, illiterate people. Now, this nobility lies in their ability to reflect very deeply. That me and you, our philosophical tools are incapable of reflecting. And that is what brought down. That is the power of Shastra. Because these were not randomly articulated, and they trained people. So if I have to learn Ramayana and I have to go through a guru, and if our drama in the village through a master gives me that training, and that actually brings me into a reflective mode. And this institutions of reflection, this way of performing, Dharma, Artha, Kama, and every time you keep on demonstrating, remembering. So therefore we have ritual, we have calendar, we have a whole range of things. Until and unless we hold it to be very, very, important, sacrosanct, you can't disturb them, we should enrich them, we will not be able to get over this debate, because history. Now we will say, for example, Itihāsa, I don't know how many million copies of Itihāsa texts have been sold. Any Ramayana, anybody writes, however bad, however good, in Kannada, Tulu, whatever language, 1,000 copies get sold out in less than 3 months. But our historians' books are never sold. And so that tells you that that is not the kind of past that we are looking. I don't want to read these history books. I wanted to read Mahabharata. I want to keep going back to, because what does it do? It gives me happiness. What kind of happiness? Atyantika Ananda. It is the path to Atyantika Ananda. Now, whether everyone wants to go there or not, on the way, I am certainly be happy. I know how to live in this world. So therefore, this way of being is highly dependent on our access to past. And the history of the kind that we are debating actually dislocates us from our access to past. There has to be some group of people who had to fight that battle of history. I think we should limit it to that group of people who are fighting the battle. Now for me, Devdutt Patnaik recently wrote about Chanakya. Now, as long as you continue to teach your history in the school, the history debates will come. For us, Chanakya, we have preserved the past. Chanakya is our past. We have a story of Chanakya, which is extremely important. I don't care whether the dates, little bit here and there, 100 years, our tradition, 100 years, 1,000 years, 5,000 years also doesn't make too much of difference, because do we really learn something? What is that you get out of it? Of course, it matters to the academic scholars who engage in the debate, let them battle that. But in general for us, now Chanakya is more important. Until and unless you teach history of Chanakya, you will never win this battle. But if you say Chanakya is our past, he is our past. He guided our political systems. So therefore we will rethink about it, we reclaim. Therefore, it's important to distinguish between the past and the history. Very sophisticated, finest way of producing the knowledge of the past. Now, I can vouch you that level of sophistication, nuancedness. If let somebody create another Itihāsa, I wanted to know, I wanted to see. It is not possible. Now, what we need to dream is in next 200 years, 300 years, if you start rethinking about it, we need more Itihāsa to be written. Itihāsa, so when people say there are a lot of prakshepa, they are not prakshepa. Every context we are adding new things which are important. That's why Mahabharata is growing. And what we have done in 20th century, we have stopped its growth. We should allow it to grow further and further. How does it matter? You know, Pandrangi sir and me, we can sit and debate. For example, I agree with this. I mean, we will continue to do that. But for both of us, at the end of the day, no, Mahabharata is for Ananda. Why did Madhvacharya use Itihāsa as Pramāṇa? The most fascinating step ever taken in Indian history. Saying he started bringing this as Pramāṇa, which other earlier scholars never considered, because it is Adhyatma, which includes how do you understand. For example, you wanted to read Manusmriti properly, hold Mahabharata. When people talk about Manusmriti, I mean, most often they don't understand what the hell is being written. And if you want to really understand it, hold on to Mahabharata, you will get to know. Because illustration of Manusmriti is there in Mahabharata, without which you can't get Manusmriti. How do I know? I have spent last 15 years reading Manu. Right? So every time I have a confusion, I do not know how to solve this, go to Mahabharata. Mahabharata will solve you what Manu is trying to say. So there is this deeper interconnectedness in the way that we have thought about our past. Therefore, there is an absolutely unparalleled and a unique way of thinking about past, not just to document in calendar when somebody died. Who cares? I mean, so many millions of people have come and gone. People will come, whomever is born, he will die. So therefore, I mean, what is so important? Imagine tomorrow, 140 crore deaths record. What will you do with that? Now, we are interested when people lived, how did they solve given problem? I mean, this is precisely why we need to really go back to the past. And I think this is an Indian way. We need to theorize it, we need to articulate it properly, and our universities should actually start having Department of Study of Past, within which history is one small subject. Very minor, we will have so many other things. On that day, we will become a culture, we are moving towards progress and flourish. So with that, I will conclude here.
As he has proposed the department of our past, it is the department of our civilizations, what we were, how we lived, how we should live. That is most important thing, which includes our history, our philosophy, our culture and all other things that should be taught to the society, the future. We have, at least from myself, I am 52 now, I am seeing the society is too much deteriorating. It is seeing so much deterioration. This father is killing son, and the son is killing his own sister and is raping her. All these things are happening last 25 years or maybe 15 years. It is getting more and more. It is because we are not feeding people the Mahabharata and Rāmāyaṇa as the stories. We are not teaching them how to live the life. These, our youngsters, now in the 20, 25 years, they are fed with the Bollywood stories and all the things which are unnecessary. That's why they are losing the purpose of life. That's why we are seeing so much problems in our society. And for this reason, our ancestors, our rishis, our acharyas, they made the Mahabharata as the compulsory education for the life. It is not something accidental or for the simply entertainment. It is for the inculcation of the story, the values of life that we were taught the Mahabharata and all other things, without which we are seeing such a kind of problem. And as you, there is one caution I have. You said, even anybody if prints Mahabharata, Ramayana, it will sell 1,000 copies in no time. Of course, it is there. But the more terrible thing that is happening is, in India, Harry Potter stories, novels are sold in millions, whereas no Indian book is sold in such a number. Not even Mahabharata, I suppose, I don't know what happened in the last 100 years, how much copies are sold of Mahabharata, but the stories are so well written by that lady, Rowling, J.K. Rowling, but that is more catching our youngsters than there is Mahabharata and Ramayana. We should have our hands in such kind of storytelling. Maybe mythical stories, but the story should have the Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, that the essence of life that should be there. Unless we create such stories with morals and this Indian ethos, we will fail in our goal and our society will lose its future. That is a very terrible thing that is going to happen us. That's why we should be very much serious about this thing. Otherwise, India will become America. Half of the people will be mad. There will be mass shootings in the malls. No, I am seeing everybody will have to take pills to have simple sleep. Every day they will have to, half of the America is divorced. They want, these multinational companies, they want to make India so, because they can sell more drugs and all other things. That is happening here, but we are not serious about this thing.
Itihasa is Paramarthika and Vyavaharika. Paramarthika, Vyavaharika distinction, I think, is Ade Hogbidide. That I think we've lost, that there is this thing. And like you were mentioning, I think Narayanacharya, like Narayanacharya's lectures used to happen over months. Like Bhagavata Saptaha and Bhagavata Purti Masa Agodo. And every day you go there, he will connect what is happening to like every day there will be some politician nodidira iವರು ದುರ್ಯೋಧನ ಇದೇ ದುರ್ಯೋಧನ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ವು like every character he knows who it suits in today's times, and it is updated every day. So I think, like you said, if this is living in the past, we are happy living in the past, and because it is for happiness. It is so that is beautiful. I think another round of applause for Chaitra sir. Pranav bhai, so I think when I read that sense of the past, he has also taken, there is a course you took on sense of the past. I think again, let us delve more deeper in this whole distinction, history, and how we look at it. What is the sense of past? I think
Sri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Rama. I have a very difficult task, given that, say, the kind of stances that have been taken by my two previous speakers have basically shifted the kind of plane of what discussion could actually be situated at. But I'll start with what Pavanji actually ended with. He said content could be there, but more importantly than the content, we also require to have a sense of what is the form and also the manner in which it is conveyed. So maybe I'll focus on that form part, and the discussion on content, there can be many debates, and let them be. Whether we like it or not, history is today a discipline of study in the world of academics, and it has an impact on the nature of how people think as well. In fact, in the nature of how the world is currently operating, every aspect of life is thought of as to have some historical kind of way of looking at things. In fact, everybody asks, is this how the historical view is? What is the specific thing that has come to be which has more or less thrown out the sense of quote-unquote ananda? And that's not the kind of aspiration also felt, because one is ready to as well live lives of, say, sorrow, despite, say, a possibility of overcoming it. But there is that reality that we get to see as on today. I intend to place this in the context of what philosophers of history have specified in terms of how they speak about fact and historical fact. Here, sometimes it helps to as well quote somebody who is more prominent. So, Professor G.C. Pandey, Govind Chandra Pandey, was one of the pioneers in terms of trying to see what would be Indian approach to looking at the past. He had a very strong assertion. Many people think facts are what they are, but they are not so. It is actually a making of the person who is trying to make sense of a situation, and that is where they create facts. So facts are not to be taken as sacred, as it is generally taught to students and also generally understood in the society, but that is not how things are. And there is also a Western philosopher by name Susan Langer who goes on to say, the world so divides into facts because we so divide them. It's not that facts are existent, but we are actually, and to put in a mathematical language, if one were to say facts have a certain kind of a set with certain elements in it, and you speak of truths, and they also have certain elements in it, the cardinality of truths is much, much higher than that of cardinality of facts. And the obsession with facts is a certain kind of a educational endeavor which has been spread across the world over the past, let's say, 200 to 400 years or so. And people would like to qualify this with scientific facts, historical facts, and so on. But primarily the factual position is what is asked. But we need to also be careful that when this translation happens, fact does not, or factual position does not ever translate to yathartha, which is a shastriya word, which is actually what people strive towards. There are, and maybe I also should say that since if we are to speak about Itihasa of Kali Yuga, since we have an Itihasa of Treta Yuga, Itihasa of Dwapara Yuga, so long as we have Trikalagnyas, Itihasas are possible. But Trikalagnyas of what kind is also a question, and which is where, say, the sense that Kavyashastra tells is Nan Rishihi Kurute Kavyam. So unless you are a Rishi, you can't actually come up with a Kavya. And we may not have had, say, Itihasas in Kali Yuga, but we have had several Aitihasika Kavyas. And one of the concrete kind of efforts that was made in post-independent India by a traditionally trained, quote-unquote, modern historian to try and ask and try to respond to the question, what is our own way of looking at the past, was late Professor Vishwambhar Sharan Pathak of Gorakhpur University. He was a double PhD. He did a PhD under Professor Rajbali Pandey, who was also well known for many of us because of his Hindu Samskaras book published by Motilal Banarsi Das. And he also was a PhD student under Professor A.L. Basham. And so his book was titled Ancient Historians of India. And this is in many senses a pioneering work because it's focused on what is the form that our own ancestors have taken in terms of describing what happened. So the lead example taken in this work was about Harshacharita and how Harshacharita is to be read. And this is done in the manner of showing, say, how Naṭya would speak about from Bijankura to Phalagama, the various stages in which one finds a kavya or a Nāṭaka to be actually, say, understood. It is in that sequential understanding, and that sequence is something which also has a very important element of sequencing, which is focusing on causality and not that of chronology. And this becomes a very significant kind of a difference and distinction to be kept in mind, because he gives an example of how one can think of this method that he is speaking of, because one needs to have a method to approach past. So he says that amongst the Nayayikas of our medieval past, medieval again is a problematic thing given the nature of periodization that we do. But if you take, say, Prachina Nyaya and then, say, Navya Nyaya, so in between, if you take the nature of Nayayikas, they have actually conveyed a particular form of Anumana Pramāṇa, which is called Seshavadhanumana. And Professor Pathak actually picks on that and says this is something akin to which we should approach the manner in which we look at past and the narration of the past in our current present times. So the standard stock example given for Seshavadhanumana is, imagine we are actually in front of a river which is flowing up to its brim. And it has not rained in the past 10 days that we are actually observed, but still the river is flowing up to its brim. But despite the fact that, say, it has not rained here, if it is flowing up to its brim, I should be categorically, without any kind of an iota of doubt, I can say with 100% clarity that it must have rained upstream. And this is not what I have seen. It's an anumana, because if this river is flowing, then water must be coming from above, because water has this quality that it can only flow towards the slope. And this is a universal property. So therefore, say it must have rained elsewhere must be a question. So causally, the reason why the river is blowing up to its brim is because it has rained upstream. Now one might as well ask a question, why did it rain upstream? This is a very difficult question. Normally say, why did it rain upstream is never how you actually speak of, but we Indians have a very fascinating way in which answering these questions also. If at all it is happening in the rainy season, you would say it is natural that it has happened. But let us, for the time being, let's say it is in the summer season that it has rained, and that is why, say, there's a surprise. The river is flowing up to its brim. Now, we speak of a Ramaraja where, say, you need to have 3 showers every month. And the shower is something, and this is a cultural memory. So now point is that if you have a rain which is happening during summer, what caused this rain during summer is a question. One could as well say that it is because of the dharmic rule of people in the upstream A, or because they have actually specifically tried for an ishti called Kariri Ishti, which is the way in which you would go about, say, invoking the rain gods whenever there is a requirement. And this is something that we do even to this day. So there is a sense in which we have a sense of how causality can be established even to the question, why did it rain upstream? Now, if suppose you have an answer that somebody indeed performed a Kariri Ishti, then you can ask a question, why did they perform this? Now, this questioning of why takes you back in time, but the nature of how you are describing it is primarily trying to give a causal sequencing of how things have happened and what things are of matter to you. And this is an approach which, when it comes to a historian's hand, you do not know. See, normally in Anumana Pramāṇa, the key question is you have a hetu, which is in this instance, say, the case of sadhya actually, because you have the river flowing up to its brim is right in front of you. Now we are actually imagining what is its hetu, and one has to establish a vyapti lakshana, the kind of pervasion which is actually bringing about the hetu, which is what actually giving you is this instance of the cause and the effect. So the imagination and the vyapti, how you establish to imagine the hetu here, having observed what is the kind of sadhya that is in front of you, there, whatever are the kind of sources that we find, whether it be in terms of the archaeological or epigraphical or say literary, variety of these sources can actually be picked and kept in mind that say you are trying to explain Why is the situation as it is right in front of me as on today? Acharya, I have one way in which I believe Amarakosha's definition of Puravritta could still be defended, even if it is not speaking about Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. How do we at all speak about what happened in the past? The issue is, and I have never had the fortune of meeting Dr. K.S. Narayanacharya or any of the Kannadiga's legends here, but I was very fortunate to follow with some keen eye what Sri D.V. Gundappa spoke of. He called himself a journalist, and he also asked a question, what is my path to moksha being a journalist? And his way of describing is something that I can never forget. It's a kind of, say, summary that I learned from a magazine published online, and they said, Sri Gundappa ji used to say that if I were to describe what is happening, I should be having the exact language in which what has happened to be captured, and I should have the felicity of mind to understand, grasp what exactly happened. And that can only happen if I am in a position where I have studied all the Shastras, I have studied all the kind of existent, the Itihāsa, Puranas, and so on, to understand in which situation, what kind of description ought to be done. It is then that I will be in a position to describe what I am seeing accurately. Otherwise, I don't have the ability. Now, it is this exercise of an obligation on me to describe what I see would have to ensure that I have to make all these studies. This is a thing that I have understood. I'm not sure if I can quote exactly, but this is what I grasped from, say, that kind of a position. So if one were to describe, forget about past, what is happening in the present also, how do you do that? This is not a case where, say, one has everything given. One can as well make a recording of this entire thing and say, this is what happened. It doesn't actually work. Because the context in which we are trying to bring in, for a person seeing the video may not be in a position to capture. And words carry meanings, and the meanings also change with time. Given all these situations, unless we appreciate that, say, nature of describing, which is what Nayayika does about, say, how do I have a description of reality? Yathartha Varnana can only happen when I have accurate understanding of what is the way in which I observe things and also show that these are the pramanas based on which I am doing it. So this Seshavadhanumana formulation that Professor Pathak brought in is something that was a revelation which I do not think has been worked on with sufficient kind of rigor post Professor Pathak or his students. Now, in terms of the nature of form, one other aspect that we need to notice is there's also this myth which is actually used, which hasn't been discussed as much. In Greek thought, people spoke of mythos and logos to be two different kinds of approaches to, say, nature of reality. Now, mythos was something which was rather, say, atmiya, because it wanted, say, people to relate to it. And it was in the form of narrations. People would not understand dry logic. They may not understand numbers. They may not understand, say, a very rigorously made argument. But if you tell a story, it is something that captures the heart much quickly. So that sense is where mythos was something which was considered as an important element by the Greeks. And they wanted to have both of them go hand in hand. It's a different story that because of certain kind of scientific obsession, primarily of the positivist kind, that you notice that, say, the mythos was considered as something which is to be shunned, or rather to be thrown away, neglected. That has never been a position, fortunately, in India, which is why, say, what Chaitra Avaru described as, say, living forms of these, say, existent practices where narrations happen, that is still present despite the onslaught. The onslaught is not something which is small also. The onslaught has been very, very strong. In such a scenario, if we were to have a kind of counter, and I do not think that, say, it can be a discussion amongst, say, some, this is where I disagree with Chaitra Avaru, that, say, academic discussions can possibly be set aside. I don't think that can happen because the academia is strongly influencing those people who we are not able to reach. And therefore, one possibly calls for, say, a different form of approaching this. And when we look at the Western theories of whatever kind it may be, whether it is a theory of society, a theory of aesthetics, theory of polity, each of them begins with a notion of what man is. I mean, Aristotle might say zoon politikon, so therefore man is a political being, and then politics actually is, textbooks on politics are written. Man is a social animal. There's a construction, and then say sociology textbook get written. We ourselves have had a very particular understanding and clear understanding of what man is. And this is one thing that Professor Pathak actually made a very significant contribution to, because he highlighted that in the Nikhantu of Yaskacharya, there's a question, Manushyaha Kasmat, and the response is Matva Karmani Sivyanti. Take any of the definitions of Homo dash, Homo sapiens, Homo deus, Homo erectus, Homo politicus, Homo faber, list all these varieties of, say, descriptions of what man is, which have been used to actually describe varieties of theories to try and impact the nature of how human being lives as on today. We have a very clear kind of formulation that a man cannot but do karma, and what a man does is he is actually, say, weaving his own, say, karmas together to form a tight-knit cloth where there's no kind of a gap or a hole that one could find. A Vaidika interpretation of this is that karma, there is a Vaidika karma, which is ordained by the Veda, and there is no time left for a person from one karma to another. If you actually want to say there's no gap in between, one has a karma from morning, say, waking up till, say, night when you sleep, and even how this has to happen. There's an entire thing for an entire lifetime, which is what our Shastras do indicate. In that sense, our Shastras are as Vedic as you would find, say, Islam claims itself to be Vedic, because Quran gives the deeds. The point again is, this sense of deeds as karma is not how we are understanding karma today. There's also, say, historically and also in time, karma's meaning has been expanded to go beyond the sense of Vaidika karma. There are, say, if one were to just take it as a purposive action, that there is some kind of a thing that is willed and then correspondingly acted on. In such a scenario also, Matva Karmani Sivyanti gives a remarkable kind of strength and power of language as to how we can describe what we are doing. So this shift in terms of what we can see as what man is, because after all, the effort to identify and speak of a sense of past is a human endeavor. And man's endeavor is better understood when we know what man needs to be spoken of as, and follow that kind of a thread, because as, say, our Shastras say, itidik. I'd like to say, conclude here, because there's a lot more that can be said, but I'm sure we do not have much time. So this is the direction. Namaskara.
When you talked about that Nāṭaka, Abhyasa, I think we have lost that also. It will be very difficult to find Nāṭaka Abhyasa of that kind in a urban setup today. So do we have hope? Or how do we go? I think if all of you can, for 5 minutes each, try to put light on that kind. What do we do now? What should be? Will there be different pedagogical approaches? When I say pedagogy, I'm not limiting it to classroom kind of a setup. So if I have to do now, I am alienated. So I have my alienation because of colonialism, my education. So I think that is a story of most of us here. So if that is there, what is our hope? How do we? And if we have to create today's Itihasa, I think Pranaba also try to talk something about it. So how do we go about doing this? And do we have hope? I think that also is something.
See, in terms of hope, in last 10 years of my experience, don't match this with Narendra Modi government. This has nothing to do with Narendra Modi government. Last 10 to 12 years of experience that I have seen, worked in different villages in Karnataka and other parts of the country. There are good reason to be hopeful. Actually, there are not, in the sense, see, what people have been saying, what academicians have been trying to do is one part of the game. But I think society has moved on and they are rediscovering. I think I wanted to remind you something. There was an important question that was asked to Dharampal when Babri Masjid demolition happened. Now, so therefore, I mean, he was being a Gandhian. There was a question about, was the demolition of the masjid as an ethical work, whether you wanted to support, etc. So, I mean, one should read that essay, brilliantly written. There is a talk which was later transcribed into an essay, where he takes this position saying, look, one can debate about it, whether it's a right thing to do or not right thing to do. And one could actually keep on going back to a range of things that have happened in the past and take certain position about it. But now if you look at that particular event, what is this? Is that event or what made that event to occur? Event as some kind of a symptom of a larger phenomena. So his answer is, there is 1,000 years of slumber from which a civilization is getting up. And it has started moving on its own. Now, the challenge is, as intellectuals, if you guys understand what is happening, you will remain relevant, otherwise you will become irrelevant. Now, he has also said then, I had never taken it seriously, but now I see the way this civilizational awakening is going to change the politics in next 20 years that you guys are unable to comprehend. And now I know what did he mean by that. So there is a tremendous shift that happens. So therefore, one of the important points that I wanted to say that there is this kind of reawakening happens in different form. There are all kinds of experiments that are happening in our society, whether it is in urban area, even in the rural area. People on their own, whatever they think that they have been doing. Now, one of the important things that as academics that we can do, just to correct what Pranav responded, keep academics out of it. I didn't say that. So what I was trying to say is that even if academicians want to think about what is that we should think about our culture, how do we really study culture, not because our society just had a problem today, but as knowledge to the whole world. Other societies also need knowledge. And if our ancestors have produced knowledge, because when Shankar Bhagavad-pada wrote or Madhvacharya wrote, they never wrote it for Indians. They wrote it not even just for human beings, Sakala Charachara. So the whole world they thought about. So in that sense, how do we really reformulate some of these things that are happening? And the number of times, the way you are thinking that in some places, because you are living very close to Bangalore, I can understand that your grim situation, that things are disappearing. But come to my part of the world, which is just 180 kilometers away, the way it is becoming vibrant, the way things are coming back to the full glory, tells you a very different story. Of course, around Bangalore, you go and talk to any university in Bangalore, whichever good, bad, they say these are all useless, etc. We will go and look at society. Society looks at it very differently. Therefore, now I wanted to get back to Dharampal's point once again. If those intellectuals, those academicians who are interested in about society, culture, what should be the future, if they don't understand and get the pulse of what these people are thinking, they will be rendered irrelevant very soon. Whomever it is, including myself. So now one of the important points, academicians have a very interesting role to play, that if we start theorizing them, if we start working on them seriously, develop appropriate descriptions, develop methods of how do we really help these initiatives, if we do that, now what you can do is, there is this unguided energy which is flooding all over the place in the country. You could really channelize them, make it very powerful. You can make the impact. At the end of the day, what is your agenda? The agenda is very simple. We wanted to see not just India, but the whole world to be in a happy mode. Happiness should flood everywhere. Now, if such a kind of a training and teaching has to happen, now it is India which has to do. So one important thing that I'm focusing on going back to society is, we can do all this provided we have the context to do this. So the context, first thing is that our achara, our parampara, we should make sure that they are all in full glory. Only then all other things will happen. Now there are some places where there are good reasons where both Acharya Pandurangiji mentioned about it, that by studying academically, many people think that it is a useless job to do. Precisely because all they say goes against their experience. So therefore, I think we should ask this question, how do we How do we make our intellectuals and the academicians sit together and reflect about what is appropriate to the experience of the people, Anubhava? Or how do we really theorize this Anubhava? And then go, and there are Shastras to guide, there are other kind of discipline, and Shastras have never stopped you from anything new. In fact, Shastra said, take my foundation and build new Shastra. How many new Shastras have come? We can create new Shastras. So nothing stops us, but our direction should go in that way. I am hopeful because there are any number of people who are taking those steps. Now, there are people who are not caring for their jobs. They leave institution because they think this is the right thing to do. So that time has come in India. Therefore, I am extremely hopeful that things are changing at a rapid pace. It might take another couple of decades for everyone to see it, but I think things will change.
If one were to focus only on the past 70 years of our current, say, post-independent era, if one seriously takes a look at, for the sake of, say, argument, only Jnanpith awardees and their works, even Girish Karnad for that matter, I don't mind. The manner in which they have approached their subject and the way in which they try to bring in their imagination has so much to teach. And how far we relate to what happened in the past is something that is a challenge which they have blessed us with. So if we are ready for it, I'm sure, say, things are on. And that, say, youngsters are also listening to it. So therefore, if something is left unattended, it means that it's an opportunity for us. And that's something that we should embrace it with all happiness and also with vigor. So that's, I think, a message that all of us would probably be happy to share.
I see very grim situation in the coming years. There are two aspects where everybody is wearing tilak and everybody is going on the Hindu Harikathā Yatra, but whether they are really, they are observing Dharma. The Dharma, ahimsa satyamasteyam shaucham indriya nigraha. That is the question. That is not happening in India because too much of the modern influence, maybe Western liberalization, imperialism, Charvakism, neo-Charvakism, and 30 trillion economy also. The dream of 30 trillion economy, that is very difficult. Because of the 4 trillion economy, we are facing such problems in our India. What will happen if we go to the 30 trillion economy? I am very skeptical about this thing. Of course, there may be slogans, maybe everybody is doing all these dramas. I don't think it is going to happen. But there is a kind of renaissance, little bit resurrections, little bit. People are ready to understand what our ancestors have written. That we are seeing in last maybe 10, 15 years, 20 years. There is an interest among the educated what our ancestors have done, and we need to understand it. And observation and the performance is little bit longer, but most of the society is driven towards the American dream.
I think this is the other side of the problem I was talking about, that urbanization, alva. So I think the moment we get urbanized, and this story which I was talking about is my story of living in Bangalore, like Idmando, where I don't have this cultural foundations, and I agree with you where, yes, I think there is this resurgence where we all feel in A.K. Saran's terms that we feel homesickness of the source anta. So he says, Awadh Kishore Saran says, homesickness of the source. I think that hits us, and we are in this journey. One question which is here is that where do we find the anchor in? Like, how do we anchor ourselves? If we want to get connected to our source, if you want to get connected to our way of looking at the past, our way of telling stories, one is, yes, now will we write new Itihasa is a different thing. Now I am like this. I cannot do it. I am helpless in one sense. Maybe my ancestors were in, and I could go there is a difficult question. But how do we anchor? How do I re-anchor myself?
So I will make a quick remark because see, I am in constant conversation with a lot of Gen Z group. Okay, so, and I've taught them when, for a couple of years when I was in Chanakya, I consciously chose to teach the undergraduate program, which I never had an experience of. Now, there is something very phenomenal that they have. They are exposed to all the cock and bull stories, modern academic thing, the American dream, all that is there. And second, because of our education system, they have hardly any socialization. From the age of 4 or 5, 12 hours a day they go and then they're put onto tuition, there are all kinds of recreational activity. It is our problem. And we have made attendance compulsory. Unlike us, we are very free. So we were irregularly regular to schools. So, but now they are all regularly regular to schools. So therefore, this has created multiple kinds of problems. For instance, they, unlike our generation, for example, in the kind of setup, even in people who were born and brought up in Bangalore, we used to have this multiple independent relationship with the adults when we were children. Now there are all kinds of adults of different jatis, different groups with whom we used to freely interact. And this was never a guided, cautious kind of an interaction that we were flooded with them. So because there were more number of socialization that was available to us. Second, within our families we had, even whether you call it all this giant nuclear, this is rubbish. There is nothing called joint family. We had families. So, but nonetheless, whatever that you call, so in that family, whether they belong to your house or not, there is this intergenerational communication. Now, what has happened is this Gen Z lacks this intergenerational communication. Therefore, there is some kind of a, lack of emotional stability to them. Now, in our tradition, what happens, if you are born and brought up in a very small area, there was these interactions used to allow you to arrive at a viveka buddhi. Now, this taratamya viveka is something that they don't know. So therefore, one of the very important things is that this Gen Z is looking for people whom they want to idealize. This is a common thing. They have follower, influencers, all that. Now, that's why if you go and look at whether it is Guruji Ravi Shankar, Sadhguru, any of this, they are flooded with these people. And they're flooded precisely because very simple thing like, your socialization and the learning and your judgment abilities were missing. Because I have a very lengthy conversation with these children. I wanted to know what is happening in their head. Now, therefore, one of the challenges that if at all we wanted to really do is to create this opportunity of socialization. Now, what do we do? Even in the villages, don't think in our village now, even though they live in our village, but they have to go for the same schools, same attendance, they're struck. Now everybody, we fought in our village, we want, 1 to 7th, we need 10 teachers, now we have 10 teachers. But that is a problem because our children cannot go to ritual functions. Our rituals are not according to the calendar. So then you have to wake them at 4 o'clock in the morning. So you run into all kinds of problems to go through this modern modern education has become more or less incompatible with our culture. So now we are unable to recognize this. And our modern ways of living I will add one more example and tell you. See, I live in an apartment. Okay, so I have parents who are old aged. And they, for their entire life, they lived in the village with a particular kind of ritual life. So they had, for example, in their daily life, they have multiple kinds of water. In Kannada, madi neeru. There are different kinds of water they need and that requires different sources of water. They need tulsi. They need whole range of things. And it is almost because we have one source of water in our apartment. Now, so I had to figure out some kind of apad dharma and solve this problem because it is simply unthinkable to make. And what is that we have missed in thinking about is that this makes us unhappy. Now, look at 1 crore people in Bangalore living in unhappiness. Now, and I'm telling you, and I'm thinking about it, every day we are unhappy. Right? And therefore, we have not thought about how do we design our spaces, how do we reorganize our life. These are the kind of requirement that has to come from academic institutions. This is the step that we have to take. Until and unless we take this kind of re-reflecting about what makes, our modern system compatible to our culture, because our culture has the capacity to sort of simply sink, whatever modern comes. There is absolutely no problem. We have dealt with Islam, we have dealt with all forms of Christianity, and we have managed to survive with all that we are doing. Right? So even today you will see at any point in time in Bangalore, you see 1 million people doing Sandhyavana at least twice a day. So there is absolutely no problem to sustain that. But we have become insensitive. Our generation has become insensitive to look at. So when I talk to these things in Gen Z, Gen Z are more ready to get back to the tradition. We are not ready to show them our tradition. So I think the large amount of problem lies in our heads than the Gen Z, because today's Gen Z are more bold. They have more possibility. So I think one way to look at it is, I'm not seeing a doomsday kind of a thing. In fact, what our Pandurangiji described has definitely not just some element, as a deep element of truth. There is no question of denying what he said. The question is precisely that there is a call to us that we have to act in this world to make what our ancestors had given to us. We should actually hand it to the next generation. There is a responsibility within us. Now, one of the difficulty of our generation is that we have not invested our time and energy in reflecting about it. I think this is the time, there is a demand. This Gen Z is actually challenging us. क्या उखाड़ लिया तुमने? This is the question that they are actually posing it in front of us. And it is the time for us to respond. And we are caught up in, अच्छा अभी बिहार में 200 sweep हो गया, हिंदू धर्म पुनरुत्थान हो गया. ऐसा नहीं होता है. So therefore we need to rethink about what we have to do as practical ways of interfering and addressing to the demands of the world. Because my grandparents, my parents, selflessly attended to so many people. And every time when I used to ask when I was an undergraduate student, my father, what is that you achieved by living in this village? That was this young blood was asking that question. And today if I look at him, I don't think I can even ever, do what he has done without money, without much property. As a simple schoolmaster, what he has done for Dharma, I don't think even a fraction of it that I could do. So I think something that we in our generation must rethink. And we must do. And this is not the question. Of course, we need to have awareness, sensitization, conversation, but more to do with practical way of doing things. It's a way of being. At the end of the day, Indian culture is not about theories. It's a way of, living a particular kind of life. So how do we, reimagine it in our apartments, where we are at a point in stage where we have come to a point we don't even recognize that we lead an unhappy life every day. So on the day you tell the story, yeah, it happens, but you're deeply unhappy. And you don't even recognize today that you're unhappy. So that is the kind of vismruti, that we have reached a point. I think we should try reflecting about it more deeply so that we can actually have a response to this. With that, I can stop.
But the point that we are in this resurgence mode where we are having this discussion more consistently. And I think there are, like you said, people who have left everything and kind of they see the importance, urgency and the need for this thing and are putting that effort in those fields. I think it's very visible and that also gives me hope. So I am a hopeful person. So I think we have had a great discussion.